Hi, welcome to the backup issue here. I'm Rena, aka Rocker for your TikTok, with,
Hi, I'm Honey. I am not your host today.
yeah, I'm the host, which is going to be awkward for the both of us. But here on the backup issue, we do companion pieces to our main monthly video on the Christ on Fit Opinions. So go watch that and then come back and watch us talk about the new topic, which is adult sidekicks, or really just non child sidekicks, I think is what we're doing at here. Because this month's episode was whether or not we should bring back child sidekicks. Now we're going to talk about all the non-child sidekicks you can have. Um, the Is there any particulars that you want to that jump out to you as good or bad examples?
The first two immediate examples that I think come to mind is you need to discuss either is it an adult and an adult hero, or is it an adult sidekick and a kid hero? And the two big examples I think in those situations are Rhodey and Iron Man, and Stripes and Star Spangled Kid.
I think that the other discussion, I think, is that I feel we are less prone to use the term sidekick when we're referring to adults,
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think that's part of just like the cultural view of what a sidekick is. Like adult sidekicks, the invention of sidekick exists to put a person in like the shoes of the viewer, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
a big reason why. So once you remove that, there's a different reason for why you have an adult palling around.
Yes. For instance, if you go with Stripes and the Star Spangled Kid, both in his original Golden Age interpretation and the Courtney Stargirl interpretation in the 2000s, Stripes is more of a guardian figure than he is a sidekick. This role is also seen, I guess, in during Cassandra Cain's Batgirl run, where Barbara Gordon isn't really a mentor figure, as she's more of a just this. Actually, that's a big thing. The difference between a mentor to a to a kid superhero and an adult sidekick to a kid superhero, because Barbara Gordon is definitely a mentor figure to Cassandra Cain, but Stripes is not a mentor to either the Stargirl or Star Spangled Kid. He's just a guardian figure who looks after the kid.
Well, I would say that mentor figures are a kind of character that can be sidekicks and cannot be sidekicks, right? Like
Writing.
if you were to have a chart, it would be like mentor, sidekick, not mentor, not sidekick, and you could have like the four quadrants of each. Uh, but as far as the roles go, in I guess which one do you want to talk about first? Which pairing? Because
I think one of the more interesting ones would probably be Rhodey, because he's not somebody. He's definitely someone you wouldn't immediately think of when it comes to a sidekick, and definitely when he becomes War Machine, he definitely has evolved and no longer has become a sidekick at that point. But for the entire '80s, when he's just James Rhodes, pilot and sometimes assistant and sometimes B Iron Man, he's definitely the sidekick character to Iron Man. He's definitely the Watson that Tony shares his thoughts with as he's going along cases. He's definitely the backup who shows up whenever Iron Man's having trouble, but he's definitely not a partner in equal capacity to Tony. He's Tony's employee. Two, he's not a mainline Iron Man pilot. He only ever puts on the armor when it's absolutely necessary. He's not a main active person in the story like Tony is.
I think this brings up a kind of sidekick we don't talk about in the main video, which is like in the 40s, this concept of what is or isn't a sidekick and what is or isn't a supporting character basically like doesn't super like you can have a supporting cast, but you will often have like a civilian sidekick, as the term will be coined, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I think of like Alan Scott and Doiby Dickles. Doiby isn't really like he's in the thick of it. He's in the adventures as well. He just doesn't have any superpowers, right?
My first
Uh,
guess would be like Diane Mead from the Martian Manhunter books, honestly.
yeah, like I'm never ever we're not gonna have an episode where I don't bring up something from Green Lantern. I'm so sorry, but as we progress in those in like the future, supporting characters get more developed, and because of that, we don't really need these civilian sidekicks. You don't need Lois Lane constantly being in the thick of everything for her to have her own compelling like journey and stories with or without Superman. Similarly, like that's why Rhodey ends up in a suit. Like the need for a civilian sidekick kind of dies out, and we're left with this man who has to have a suit. You know,
which is strange because Rhodey doesn't become War Machine until like the mid '90s. He's been like throughout the entire '80s, a few years in the '70s, and a few years in the '90s. He's just a guy who sometimes will maybe put on the armor, but he doesn't really do that ever, and he's just there to back up Tony whenever he needs to.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but does he not wear it for an extended period of time in the '80s, or am I just fully?
So he wears the armor during the mid '80s, right after the Obadiah Stane takes the company and drives Tony into his alcoholic stupor. But then during that period of time, Tony refuses to wear the armor, and so Rhodey becomes the new Iron Man. But then Rhodey gets his own psychological problems with wearing the armor, and so during the by like 86 to like 90 or 91 or 92, he just really refuses to ever put on the armor ever again, and just like he'll come in with an Uzi or like a gun or some other type of weapon to go and back up Tony, but he won't wear the armor.
Yeah, so that is interesting. Also, War Machine being a '90s concept explains the name a lot.
Oh yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm not someone who reads a whole lot about adult sidekicks.
What do you think the role of a sidekick is supposed to be in a book? Because I don't think I really agree with the ideas you've been positioning here.
So I think it depends on the role. So I think in the Golden Age, sidekicks are viewpoint characters, in my opinion, a whole lot. Like that's why you have the advent of child sidekicks a whole lot. I think as it grows older, it gets a bit more nebulous. I would say that a sidekick is meant to be like someone who like the hero bounces off of. You know, they're inherently a supporting character. Not like supporting as in like less important, but supporting as in like supporting structure, so to speak. Mm-hmm. You know, now that you say it, it's honestly kind of hard to pinpoint on it. The reason why I even brought that up is I think again about how like if the sidekick is second fiddle, then they exist like to fill in the spaces where the hero can't necessarily be there. But what do you think?
I get where you're coming from here. I think a more clear definition that stretches across decades is that the sidekick serves the role to do things in the story that the protagonist can't do. So in the early 40s, the sidekick serves the role of being the audience point of view because the actual protagonist, the hero, is so steadfast on being this sort of symbolic, perfect author method of just winning the story immediately type of writing structure that you can't have an audience point of view through that character, and so it becomes something that the superhero can't be, which is the audience point of view. But the sidekick as a whole is just whatever it is the hero can't do themselves. So Rhodey, in this instance, he often serves as Tony's sense of humor a lot of the time. Tony's a very dry, serious, emo character a lot of time in the especially in the 80s. So he needs Rhodey to be the comic relief, not to make like jokes about Rhodey, but to just be basically be what people often say Robin was in the 50s and 40s, where just you needed a ray of sunshine sometimes to like make things a little happier because things were getting too dark with just Tony by himself.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think when you put it in that context, it clears up a lot of like who is or isn't necessarily the sidekick situation, you know?
I think an interesting example then in the sidekick is doing what the hero can't is Stripes in this situation, because Stripes we all like, even though Stripes is the adult in the situation, the comic very much sets it up at every point that Stripes is the sidekick to Star-Spangled Kid in both versions of the story. So the question becomes, what is Stripes offering that the kid can't do, especially when a lot of the time the kid is way more powered than Stripes is also. And I think the big thing that Stripes is offering is just the passage into adulthood that the kid can't really enter. Like, the cops aren't going to respect and talk to a kid. They need to talk to Stripes. The cops aren't going to respect and like, they're not going to be able to get information from people who aren't. It's like Detective Conan in that light. Detective Conan. Have you read Detective Conan?
You're talking about Tintin, right?
No, not Tintin. I'm talking about Case Closed.
Then no, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm so sorry.
Detective Conan is a very long-running detective manga anime series, otherwise called Case Closed when it was translated to the West. It's about this teenage detective who then gets aged down into a little boy who still has to go around solving crimes, but no one believes or respects that a little kid his age can be smart enough to be solving these crimes, and he doesn't want to draw unnecessary attention to himself. So he will pretend that this other detective is the actual one solving his cases, where he will, like, sleep dart him, put him in a chair, and then sit behind him in the chair and, like, give his discussion on how he thinks the case actually was solved and solve the case for everyone, because no one can actually believe that a little kid would actually solve all this stuff, so he needs the mask of adulthood in order to accomplish things. I think that's the actual purpose Stripes serves in the Star-Spangled Kid Stripes dynamic of being the adult that the rest of the adult community will actually take seriously, as opposed to the little kid. Because we've seen in, like, the 90s when kid superheroes started getting their own solo books all over the place, a running gag is that none of the cops, none of the adult figures respect a teenage kid running around solving crime all by themselves. And so the proper role that Stripes does is just basically serve as legitimacy that there is an adult of some kind running around with the kid.
That's interesting. I think it kind of is giving me, like, it reminds me of, like, Hanna-Barbera. I don't know why, but, like, the mystery stories, like, this is not connected at all, but, like, the kind of, like, Scooby-Doo joke that, like, the reason why Shaggy's there is to drive the van. Like, the idea of, like, you, you just need, like, the pragmatic reasons why people are there. And I think that works a whole lot when we're talking about the role of a sidekick, and would explain a lot of adult sidekicks. Any other adult sidekicks that aren't Star Spangled Kid or
Rhodey?
Rhodey?
I think a great, more modern example, because these are definitely all, like, Star Spangled Kid, that's, like, that was, the last time that was relevant was 99, that's not relevant anymore. The most relevant example I think anybody who's actually read a comic in the past 20 years would know about is Gwenpool and Batroc the Leaper. Batroc the Leaper, he's not a mentor, because he does give sage fatherly advice now and then, but primarily he's there just to sort of back up Gwenpool, and the service he provides that Gwenpool doesn't have is experience. It's not that he's providing the mentorship as trying to impart that experience onto her, but just she doesn't have experience. She needs somebody who does have experience, and so he offers that experience a lot of the time to help her out. And that's a strong dynamic the two of them have.
I think that's interesting because it's like this weird line in between at what point do you become a mentor, and it's very much because, like, Gwen doesn't want to be where Batroc has been in the past at all, like, she's not trying to become the next Batroc at all, which I think is, like, relevant,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually a great comparison, because I'm thinking now about Max Mercury and Bart Allen. Because Max is a mentor to Bart, and very much to the point that even though Bart himself mockingly, and they make jokes about how I'm not going to become the next Max Mercury, like, yeah, they make him become the Flash later on in the comics, but if you read the original Impulse run, it very much seems like they're setting up that one day he really will become the next Max Mercury somehow.
Yeah, and I think, like, most of that just more because Max Mercury isn't necessarily a legacy you need to have passed down, right? Like,
well, you can call him Quicksilver, but Marvel owns the rights to that name.
Well, what I mean is like in the same way that like Impulse can become a hero that is following in the footsteps of Max Mercury without literally becoming Max Mercury. In the same
Mhm.
way that the concept of Impulse itself is kind of descended from the concept of Kid Flash, even though those two don't share a name. Like maybe Impulse becomes Adult Impulse, or maybe Impulse becomes like some other title, but he will be masked. He will still be replacing the hole that Max Mercury left. You know.
I think the big difference between an adult sidekick and a mentor, when they are actually an adult with experience to be imparted, is does the purpose the mentor or adult have is the mentor is the character there in the story to impart wisdom? Like Max is always there to give a lesson to Bart. He's there to teach Bart a lesson or try to be a teacher or instruct him in some way. Batroc, on the other hand, he exists to kick people and maybe throw a knife at somebody in the face. He's not there to. He will sometimes teach Gwen how to shoot a gun or give some fatherly sage advice when she needs it, but that's just because he's old and he's kind of become a sort of father figure to her. His role in the story is not to impart wisdom to her, which I think is the big defining thing that makes Batroc a sidekick and not a mentor.
But are those two necessarily even like diametrically opposed? Can you not have a mentor role that is being a sidekick? Like,
I think the question more is, can you have a sidekick whose purpose is to impart, to like teach and train the protagonist, or is that just a mentor?
well, yeah, but like, why couldn't you have a mentor that is a sidekick? Like, what would be the issue with that?
I'm just trying to think of one that I personally would
I
consider a
mean, what makes
sidekick.
Max McCurry not a sidekick? What makes Max McCurry not a sidekick in
Well,
your
for
eyes?
starters, Max Mercury rarely, if ever, jumps into the fold and helps Impulse directly with the story. He will like show up now and then to like nag his finger and like sneer at him for screwing up on a mission, but he won't actually like interfere or help him out in a fight. He won't actually give him clues or like help him work out a mystery for him. He'll just give him some sage wisdom at the start of a story that will be relevant later on in the plot. Here's a great example of somebody who you can answer this because you're the Green Lantern expert here. Is Ganthet a sidekick or a mentor to Kyle during the 90s?
Literally the one area of Green Lantern I know the least. But okay, I I gotcha. Like mid Jeff Johns onwards, I gotcha. Like before, like literally the worst area here. So I'm going to take that and then like just redirect it to the proto Ganthet Appa,
Okay.
who was the Guardian sidekick before. And like I will say, I do think Ganthet is a sidekick by the time the Johns run, where he's calling himself Green Lantern of Sector Zero. I don't know if you've read Green Arrow Green Lantern, but they have Appa the Guardian there, who is like palling around with them on their cross country road trip here. Um, and he, I would argue, is a very sidekick role, uh, because weirdly enough, he actually plays kind of like the role. He is, I wouldn't say he's a viewpoint character, but he's similar to me to child sidekicks because he is in a learning capacity. That is his purpose there, to learn alongside with all of the I'll like learn from the two of them as they go and find the soul of America. And I think so 2000s Ganthet, yes, he's a sidekick. 1990s Ganthet, I truly could not tell you. Uh,
I can't say much on it either because I do not like Kyle at all. So I try to avoid as much as his book as I can.
you were like, I know two people who have opinions on Kyle Rayner. Like,
I have
you
very strong opinions on Kyle.
uh, it's, uh, I, I do think, here's, I wouldn't call them sidekicks, but there is an interesting role that the Allens and Jays of the world play when they have to show up to like assist like the old guard,
Mm-hmm.
the new guard makes sense, right? Like it's not consistent enough for them to be a sidekick, but when Allen is like helping Kyle Rayner out in his '90s run, or when he's helping out in Green Lantern Rebirth, he's definitely like to the side. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we expanded this from a mini series to an ongoing, it'd be like, yeah, that's a sidekick. But his role is so reduced. And this does remind me of a role of an adult sidekick that I did read, Rebirth era Blue Beetle, in which they
Oh,
I don't know if you
I haven't read Rebirth era Blue Beetle, but you did make me think of Post Infinite Crisis Blue Beetle, which has Peacemaker in it, who also has this very similar, not a mentor, but also kind of a mentor sidekick role with Jaime.
yeah. But in Rebirth era Blue Beetle 2016, oh, we this is a tangent I want to get into. What do you know about the resurrection of Ted Cord?
I know he got resurrected, and there was a story called The Resurrection of Ted Cord.
No, there is. So, to my knowledge, there is like some stories in the Booster Gold Volume 2 I didn't read where they try and bring back Ted Cord and it doesn't really happen, whatever. Okay, but so Ted Cord stays dead for the most part, all the way to the end of canon. The New 52 hits, and then they bring back the New 52, and Ted Cord is like a little Easter egg reference where he's like a Silicon Valley nepo baby tech bro, where his dad was the owner, and he only appears in Forever Evil with his blonde hair to sign off his company over to Lex Luthor. All right, that's like in 2013, I want to say 2013, 2014, and then later on in 2016, post Convergence, we have Dun 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 Rebirth, and they've completely redone Ted Cord. But he has never been Blue Beetle. He's an adult man who owns Cord Industries. He's like as old as he would have been if he never died in Infinite Crisis. But he's just like a dude. He's a dude who like made a Blue Beetle costume once, but thought he looked stupid and never went out. He's not like a superhero, right? And he's there to help Jaime with some like technological stuff. He's there to help Jaime explore the Scarab, to learn more about the Scarab, all this stuff. And then apparently, no one told Tom King, because in Hero Crisis, and Ted Cord is back to being like normal Ted Cord, but not only is he normal Ted Cord, he remembers his death. So Ted Cord did die. How is he back? We don't know. He's come back 3 times. He's come back 4 times, actually, but we're not going to get into Justice League 3001. But he's come back 4 times, all of which are directly contradictory to one another, and none of which, like, explain how he came back. Because there's no story in which Ted Cord actually came back. But in Rebirth, he plays this role to Jaime that, like, if he's a mentor, he's bad at it. Like, he doesn't have a whole lot of experience with like superheroing. So like he's helping Jaime out, and like it's kind of rushed because it only has like 12 issues. But he's like trying to be the guy in the chair for Jaime, and I would argue he is a sidekick when he ends up in the end of the series running into danger, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's very Rhodey-esque from how you described him, where like he's not gonna fully suit up, but he's got like guns, not real guns, like the
Rhodey has actual Uzis.
Yeah, but like, and it's weird. I don't know how. It's weird because it's like you're clearly only here because you're Ted Cord, but you're not Ted Cord. You're you're some version of him.
An interesting counter to all this is Peacemaker during the post-Infinite Crisis Jaime run, because he's definitely a mentor, but the question of what is he actually supposed to be mentoring Jaime in is up for debate, because he's not teaching him how to use the Scarab. That's Jaime figuring that out on his own. He's not teaching him how to be a killer, because there's no way Jaime's ever going to be using guns or doing any of the stuff that Peacemaker's done in the past. So the best that Peacemaker can really teach him is how to keep a calm, level head a lot of the time, and how to, like, just be experienced. Like, that's the big thing between Peacemaker and Batroc in terms of their respective roles as mentor versus sidekick, is the actual purpose Peacemaker seems to have in the story is to impart his experience onto Jaime, while the purpose of Batroc is to sometimes give his experience to Gwenpool, but more often just to kick people with his big feet. Like, Peacemaker in the story is there because he has the operating system of the Reach Scarab in his mind, and so is forced to stick around because of all that. But it's not like he really actually does anything with the Reach knowledge in his head, besides maybe give exposition a couple of times in the story. He's primarily there to be a voice in Jaime's ear to make sure that he knows, you can do this, kid. You can be the one to kill this thing because you're a cool, badass guy. There is a direction I think I would like to bring up that we have not discussed at all, and that's the love interest sidekick, where they're clearly an adult. They're an adult. They're a romantic partner to the protagonist, but they're also they also are capable of fighting crime alongside the hero. See, common examples would be the femme fatale love interest, like when Catwoman will often end up becoming a supporting character in a Batman book. She often ends up becoming a sort of sidekick to Batman as the two of them fight crime together.
Yeah. And that... So what does that make you think about, like, why do you think that is, though?
I think that primarily boils down to, is the love interest in this situation an explicit sidekick in the story, or are they just a supporting character who has a bit more physical agency? And then that becomes the question of, is that just what a sidekick is? A supporting character who has a lot more physical agency over the story? And that's the question at that point, is any love interest who is a primary love interest to the protagonist, if they get superpowers, do they become a sidekick?
I mean, I do think supporting character with more physical agency in the story is, like, a good definition for a sidekick, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But I do think... So, Star Sapphire is actually a great, like, example of how this isn't the case, where, like, you could argue that Star Sapphire actually robs Carol of a lot of agency, and I would. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that Star Sapphire is not a sidekick to Green Lantern whatsoever until we get to the Jeff Johns era, where once the core is established and she's, like, superheroing around with Hal, then, like, it is not only a sidekick dynamic, but a bad sidekick dynamic.
Yeah.
It is a sidekick dynamic that, like, other characters will point out and be like, girl, you gotta be healthier. You gotta... this ain't good for you.
But then you have to bring up Lois Lane, because you mentioned earlier Lois Lane basically being a sidekick to Superman sometimes. And Lois Lane has, on occasion, gotten superpowers. But she's already established as a sidekick before she gets superpowers. So
I don't... Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I don't think Lois Lane necessarily is... This is an interesting part, because I think it needs to be physical agency that is still tied to the superhero, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So, like, when Jimmy Olsen... So, like, Jimmy Olsen getting involved in, like, all of the superhero nonsense that Clark Kent... that goes on Superman, that's sidekickery right there. Mm-hmm. But when Jimmy Olsen has his own book called Superman's Pal Jimmy Olsen, that is not him being a sidekick, because that's him doing stuff. So similarly, Lois Lane can, like, be very physically involved, but if she's involved in her own adventures, then she's not really being a sidekick. I talked about you corrected me on this, because I was thinking that with Hal Jordan in Green Lantern, where, like, Hal Jordan is doing a lot of, like, very physically involved things in John's run, where he's hunting down the Predator of all people without a Green Lantern thing. And, like, I don't think he's really, like, a sidekick there, because he's not, like, with John. Similarly, like New 52 Lois Lane has superpowers for an extended period of time, but she doesn't do anything with Superman.
That is actually a question. Is John the actual protagonist during the 80s Green Lantern era when he becomes the Green Lantern, or is it more similar to when Rhodey had to put on put on the Iron Man armor because Tony was an alcoholic wreck and could not physically wear the armor without causing problems?
I have not read enough of 80s Iron Man to like tell you of that era there, but I do think so much is independently dedicated to John. Like when I see those segments in Green Lantern that's dedicated to Hal, I think of it in the same way that there are other characters like I forget their names, but Hal's friend who was put in a wheelchair by that event. There's also like parts of the story that are dedicated to just him and his significant other, like on their own. Like, and I wouldn't say that they're like as much space is being taken by Hal as them occasionally. And while they'll fill the background of, on their own, he's just another character. Like Green Lantern had a lot of characters in that, and I don't think John isn't the protagonist. Now, you know who isn't the protagonist but has superpowers? Katma. Katma's a sidekick. I realize that now.
Yeah,
like,
she is.
And like in that role, she's also a mentor. Like I would argue.
Because her role in there is to literally be the Abin Sur to John Stewart.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking now about like...
Which makes me wonder about the workplace harassment HR violations they have to make about John Stewart being in a relationship with his mentor.
And also, if she's the Abin Sur, then Sinestro was the officer to one Hal Jordan.
Absolutely. I 100% see Sinestro as Hal's Abin.
Yeah. Which, not the worst relationship to spawn out of that dynamic, to be sure. But yeah, like, which is interesting because that means Katma kind of runs the gamut of every kind of sidekick we've talked about so far. Because when she's with Hal, she's the rookie. When she's with John, she's the mentor. Then she becomes the love interest. Then so like those are already like 3 different positions right there, and like she varies from whether or not she's a sidekick, and she's also like a teammate for a good portion of that as well. Like so, Cat was just cool, man. Like, but I think that shows the flexibility of like the abilities of like what a sidekick can do. You know, this spiraled off of a tangent of me saying that I don't think Lois Lane with superpowers is inherently a sidekick unless she also is doing these adventures with Superman.
I brought up that topic more specifically of, so Lois Lane is a sidekick in Superman's books helping him out in the mystery, and then you'll get a story where Lois Lane will get superpowers in a Superman story. Does her status as a sidekick become raised, or is the fact that she has powers unrelated to her sidekickness in that situation? Do they actually affect it at all if she's already default? Like, there's not like a tier system to how much of a sidekick you can be. I guess there can be. Like, one person can clearly be more of a sidekick to the hero than the other person is more of a sidekick. But, like, I don't know if you can really measure that with, like, having powers versus not having powers.
Well, that's the interesting thing, because I think that might be the problem with defining sidekicks as supporting characters with physical agency, because it definitely can feel off if like but like I think it might be weird to consider Lois Lane as a sidekick in certain stories, but also like if Jimmy Olsen was doing the same thing, I'd probably call him a sidekick. So like, what if in the end of the day, sidekick's just a marketing term? And we're all caught up on them.
I think that's a great way to end this episode.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter.
No.
What is or isn't a sidekick.
Is there a closing remark you want to do for this?
No, I guess. Is there any fun questions you have? Because
I'm
uh,
not Miranda. I don't come up with the weird, wacky question at the end of these videos.
I'm gonna miss that. I guess. Uh, Here's my question: what is a superhero who you? I think we've already discussed last time what are superheroes you want as a sidekick, but like, what are? I guess like the alternative here is like, what are some child superheroes that you think could really have an adult sidekick, like or
Um,
younger?
you mean what kid sidekicks you think should grow up and become adult sidekicks?
No, like what kid characters do you think could have an adult sidekick with them?
Ah, I think I would love for Teen Lantern to get like her own Aubin Sur. I would love for that situation where she gets like not Ganthet. He's already too attached to the hip to Kyle as a concept, but like some other guardian or other elderly, ancient, retired Green Lantern of some kind who has to end up like get stuck to the hip of Teen Lantern and try to show her the ropes. But they're like they don't have the power themselves anymore. They just have to help out Teen Lantern by like showing her how to do things.
That's interesting. I kind of would like for to see Con L to have like an older like person to hang out with. I don't know why. I
Oh,
just like immediately think that like
I think
Con L
Zod would work really well as a Con L mentor supporting sidekick.
yeah, like they don't need to be a mentor. Just I think Connell has a lot of space for a supporting cast that isn't really explored.
That's fair. I'm too hung up on the mentor side of the sidekick role type of things. Yeah. Um.
Like, and I think having a sidekick would be useful, especially because like he has that perpetually young type element about him that
Mhm.
makes him like
Oh,
what
I know. I know.
like
I know what I want. I want to bring back the supercar. The supercar from Young Justice.
I was thinking because you were talking about Teen Lantern in the Wonder Comics Young Justice run, he has like a fake wife that
I'm not familiar with that.
so like they meet him on Gemworld, right?
Hmm.
And he's there, and he's like, "Oh my God, Connell, you have a wife and like child," and it's a huge cliffhanger. And then the next issue is like, "No, her husband died, and I've just been helping her out." Uh, and like it's so dumb, but
But no, I think the supercar. Bring back the supercar and make it like a Kit Knight Rider situation where like the car is can like speak to Khan and Khan is driving around in this sentient supercar that can fly.
I just like the idea of having a situation where Khan is like has is on this alien world that he doesn't super understand and is having this like woman who has no powers but is helping him show him the ropes and like he can't be a superhero without her because he doesn't know the well enough to be a good superhero for it, but she definitely like
Hmm.
does. I don't know, I think I would like that a whole lot, but I guess we would have never seen it because what Wonder Comics Young Justice, everyone.
Wonder
That,
Comics in general was like a really failed concept.
but specifically that Young Justice run, it gave us Teen Lantern and it gave us Ginny Hex, and that's all it really did.
Shame they had to. Jenny, you didn't need to wear the Confederate uniform. You could have just been a cowgirl. You didn't need to wear the Confederate uniform, girl.
It's also like I don't know, like John Hex is so long ago to me. It's just funny that she like still cares. Anyway, uh, with those being our answers, that has been the backup issue. Uh, if you would like to know anything about the comics that we've read, go read them. They're great. If you don't know the full context for this, go watch our main episode of on the channel over here. I guess we could add it in which we talk about child sidekicks a whole lot more. And if they want to check you out, honey, where can they do so?
They can find me on Twitter at honeyham17, where I mostly do art posts and talk about the various comic books that I'm live reading. I'm currently reading about Iron Man and posting a lot of the stuff I read over there. Also, you can find me on TikTok at Showcase Comics for You.
And if you want to find me, you can find me on TikTok at RockRFree. I also do live streams every Saturday with another cast of colorful characters at the Ashley Fantastic Friends live stream, 9 p.m. EST on Saturdays. Uh, Normally, this is where me and Miranda would joint pitch how we every other Sunday live stream on TikTok at a Dynamite Miranda. So it feels weird that I have three and you have two, but normally it's like two and two and one, so it's all good. Uh, but everyone, go support your local comic book shops. They work on televisions, and hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.